Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I have a special guest today, Dr. Andrew Abela. He is a professor at the Catholic University of America, and he has just released through Sophia a new book, which I'll show you on the screen here. It's called Superhabits, the Universal System for a Successful Life. Quite an intriguing title because that's a tall order. And I'll give you a little bit of biographical information. Dr. Andrew Abela is the founding dean of the Bush School of Business at CUA, Catholic University of America. Award-winning, widely cited research on integrity and effectiveness in business has been published in several academic journals and in 3 books. He speaks to business leaders around the world about cultivating the super habits of success personally and in their organizations. Prior to his academic career, Dr. Abela was a brand manager at Procter & Gamble, management consultant with McKinsey & Company, and managing director at the Corporate Executive Board. He holds an MBA from the Institute of Management Development in Switzerland and a PhD from the Darden Business School at the University of Virginia. He and his wife, Kathleen, live in Great Falls, Virginia, and have been blessed with 6 children and their first grandchild. Dr. Abela, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure to be here.
Okay, so I think the question that needs to be asked, usually interviews start with, why did you write the book? And we'll get to that. But we want to start with something, because when you look at the title of this book, it seems like a self-help book. And that kind of triggers in people's minds different perceptions. There's some self-help books that I think are great. I love, for example, it's not really self-help, but kind of billed as that style, is Dave Ramsey's book on the Total Money Makeover. I've used that. It's wonderful for home finance and everything. But sometimes on the other side of self-help, there's kind of a different thing to it that's sometimes a little off-putting to Catholics. So is this a self-help book? Is it not a self-help book? What kind of book should people expect when they read this?
So one time I was in my parish and our pastor preached a homily and he spoke at some length in a very derogatory way about self-help books. Okay. And it so impressed my younger son that a few days later I was at home reading a book and he said, "Dad, you're reading a self-help book." So yeah, there's a pejorative sense, and I think that comes from some of the books maybe aren't that well written, but others are grounded in material that is questionable, But others are really good. Others are really good. They don't pretend to be academic, but the good ones are based on sound philosophy, And the nicest compliment I got for this book, one N.S. Lyons, called it a work of deep philosophy masquerading as a self-help book.
Oh, that's
excellent. And that's, in a sense, is exactly what I was aiming for. So I was really glad he said that the book, everything I'm recommending in the book is very firmly based on the work of St. Thomas Aquinas. And he's not usually wrong, very solid. But also contemporary research, contemporary psychology research, and the best that I could lay my hands on. So social science can be quite uneven, but when you pick really well-designed studies, or when you pick what are called meta-analyses, when they bring together 20, 50, or 100 different studies and average them out to see what they find, the good social science can be quite interesting. And in fact, the best social science is proving empirically what Thomas Aquinas told us. So that's kind of really, you're onto something when you get that kind of convergence. But I wanted it to be written in a style that would be very readable. So that's the self-help book kind of feel of the thing. So the book has lots of interesting stories, and each of the points is made through a story, so that it's fun to read. Because you could read the same truths in a much more abstract or turgid way, and they wouldn't stick as well. They'd still be as true, but if they don't stick, then what was the point of that,
It's funny, we're talking about the self-help genre because I can't remember. I think it was recently reading St. Louis de Montfort's book on consecration, consecration to Mary, and it's funny. The way that he writes, in some ways, kind of sounds self-helpy, in the sense where he says things like, dear reader or whatever, I'm going to present to you the secret that if you do this, I promise it's going to help you in your spiritual life. And when you think about that from the perspective of, how people have used that type of language, it sounds kind of strange, but what he's doing is he's telling you the truth. He's saying, listen, do this, and this is going to help your spiritual life. So I personally don't think there's anything wrong with that perspective. So I'm glad that you've taken the teachings of Aquinas and put them into a, loosely called self-help format, because it's very readable. People need to have things broken down for themselves in a readable format, because, I was telling you before we came on, I'm writing a book right now on modernism. So I'm reading, Pascendi and all these modern philosophers and things like that. And it's absolutely, it's dry basically for the popular reader, and no one's going to read that, but you have to put it in a format that they can understand. So the book is about habits for a successful life, the super habits. So what is a super habit should be the first question we ask, as opposed to just a habit.
So a super habit is a virtue. So why didn't I call this the book, The Virtues? Because if I did, it would be stuck in the religion section, and all the people that I want to read it wouldn't read it. Because when people see the word virtue, they think religion or faith, which is kind of funny, because it was the pagans who invented the idea of virtue.
Yeah.
Well, I guess they were religious in some way, but so it's on the other hand, there are books about habits selling millions of copies. So people are very interested in habits, but less interested in virtue. And yet the virtues are the best kind of habits to have. And so I thought by kind of bringing the two ideas together, we might open up the audience for virtue more broader than it is right now. So a virtue is a habit of excellence, right? So it's not just a moral thing; it's a practical thing as well. So, for example, courage is a virtue. It's the habit of moving forward even though you might be afraid or anxious. It's the moral thing to do, to be courageous, but it's also a very practical thing to do, because if you don't have courage, you're not going to achieve very much, Yeah. And that's true with every single one of the virtues. They're simultaneously both moral and effective, ethical and effective, moral and practical. And so I came up with the name Super Habit, because each of these habits, each of these virtues is kind of like a superpower habit. So not just any habit like brushing your teeth, but the habit of courage is so vitally important. Likewise, the habit of self-discipline, sometimes called temperance, and so on as you go through the list. That this is these are things that anybody can learn, and once you learn them, once you develop the habit through practice, it makes you a more effective and a happier human being. So I say the word superpowers is not an exaggeration. You contrast somebody who has courage and self-discipline and is just and is discerning, good at decision-making, practical wisdom. I just named the 4 cardinal virtues, right? Prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. You have those 4 things. To compare something like that with somebody who doesn't have any of them, and the first one truly looks like a Superman, or Superwoman. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. The first book that I published, in a sense, kind of has the self-help style, in the sense that it's very progressive. It progresses through teaching basically habits and virtues that help men to develop in their life as men. And I was inspired to write the book because I had basically been listening to sermons and reading saints and things like that. And I saw there's all this stuff all over the place. And, I'm a big nerd. I'm a big, literature guy. So yes, I'm going to spend my time finding all these old books and stuff, but the average person's not going to do that. So why don't I put it to them in a concise format, in a way that is applicable to their life? And it was very successful. People enjoyed it, but I was inspired to write the book initially because there is a podcaster that I listen to, and he is a former Navy SEAL. His name is Jocko Willink. He's relatively famous. I don't listen to him as much as I used to, but he was a Navy SEAL. And so he basically teaches things on leadership and whatnot. And I was listening to him one day, and I think he's some sort of Christian, but he never talks about that. But I was like, wow, you're an extremely moral individual. He was going through all of his habits and his discipline and everything like that, and the way that he treats his employees and the way that he treats his clients and the way that he treats his family and even his approach to sport and all these kinds of things. And I thought to myself, you're basically talking about the moral life that would be espoused by a Catholic saint, just without the additive of grace. And it just, so it speaks to what you're saying, is that really we're talking about virtues. And if you follow these ways of discipline, you will be not only more successful, but most importantly, you'll be moral, which will give you interior peace as well.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And they tend to converge because, excellence in one area is going to breed excellence in another. So I remember one time many years ago being interviewed for a newspaper, and somebody was saying to me, well, if I'm sick and I need surgery, I want the best surgeon, somebody who's really good at surgery. I don't care if he gambles or cheats on his wife and my response was, somebody who gambles, cheats on his wife, probably cheated on his exams.
Yeah.
And his med school exams. I don't want him cutting me open, So excellence, as I say, is all of a piece. If someone's cheating in one area, they're less effective in another. Now, that's not always the case. We have some distorted people who are particularly good in one area and super successful in that area. So it's not always the case, but just for the average person, these things tend to travel together. So.
Well, it is generally applicable. One of the great examples of the opposite of habits and sort of the adoption of vices is Pablo Picasso. He was an incredible, basically realist painter in his youth. When you look at his work, you think to yourself, my goodness, you could have been, hired by the Vatican to touch up the frescoes if they needed it. And then you look at what he did later on and you're thinking to yourself, what on earth is this? And he was, a degenerate. I mean, he was in that group of 7 kind of crowd in Spain at the time of the Civil War there and stuff. And there was a lot of opium and there was a lot of, free love and all this kind of stuff. And his morals went the way of the garbage can. And so did his artistic style. There is a reflection there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good way of putting it. That's a really good analogy. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. What would you say is, let's start with, this is a book about habits, but of course this is written in response to the fact that people need this information. So what is the prescient need? What are the major antitheses of these super habits that are plaguing us right now?
So you pick almost any problem that our society is facing, whether it be division, people hating other people, whether it's a lack of productivity or declines in productivity, whether it's general unhappiness or anxiety or depression that seems to be kind of endemic among young people, for example. Pick any one of these big problems that people face, and at root is a missing virtue. So, for example, depression, anxiety, the virtue that's missing there is resilience, which is a type of or part of courage or fortitude. So resilience, the habit of carrying on with life despite being sad or anxious, which ironically makes you less sad and anxious when you do that, so it really works as an antidote. In terms of division, a number of missing virtues there. The virtue of friendliness or friendship we have lost, especially being friendly with people with whom we disagree about things, but also the virtue of justice, the habit of being fair and respectful to others. That's hard for a lot of people. And so the need, as I say, is widespread. There isn't a single problem. There are numerous problems. And literally, I think any major problem can be traced back to a lack of virtue. And so on a personal level, what I recommend to people is figure out what's the biggest thing that's bothering you right now, the biggest thing that's getting in the way of you having the life that you want to have. From that, we can usually deduce a virtue that if you can start growing in that virtue, your life is going to get so much better. We even have an app that maybe you notice the QR code at the back of the book. And there's a free app which actually helps you discover which virtue should I be working on, and then sends you daily text to remind you to work on it. And it's perfectly customized to you. And it's AI driven, so you can chat with it over text and say, well, that thing you told me to do is too hard. Can you give me something easier? Yeah, here's an easier version, for example. So.
What's this app called? I'd like to show it to the listeners.
Right now it's called Superhabits, and you can find it at superhabits.app.
Okay.
It's usable, but still in development. So we don't yet have the downloadable version on the iPhone or the there you go.
Android.
That's it. So you just click on that superhabits.app, and
Oh,
then you
wow.
do it through the website for now, and through texting, and it gives you there's an assessment that you do, and on 40 some different virtues, it'll let you know kind of how you're doing, and then you can retake that every few weeks and see how you're making progress.
Well, that's a great idea. That's quite in vogue right now. A lot of online communities have been popping up for things like weight loss or health things, especially. That's a prescient need for a lot of people, and really it's all about habit tracking and sort of having
Yeah.
accountability. So I'm really happy that you've done this as a Catholic, because it really is a shame that there's a lot of these voices out there that are giving good, they're giving good natural wisdom. They're almost like Stoics, like when you read the ancient Stoics, and it's like, well, that's good, but there's another level you can go to. You can go beyond Confucius and you'll get to Christ. And
Yeah.
and you can find the fulfillment of what you're trying to reach at.
Well, why don't we talk about that? The distinction between a habit and a super habit or a virtue, and then the distinction between a Stoic virtue and a Christian virtue.
Sure.
I think that's probably important to make. So a regular habit like wearing a seatbelt or brushing your teeth, versus a super habit or a virtue, the big difference there is that the super habits or the virtues are natural to us. And in a sense, we already have them as capacities, they're like muscles. The joke I like to tell is you ever had the experience where you're playing a new sport or doing something particularly vigorous, and at the end of the day you go, oh, muscles I didn't even know I had are aching me. The virtues are muscles that most people didn't even know they had.
Hmm.
That when you try to grow in courage or in self-discipline, it's not like learning a new skill. It's like relearning something. Even if you never had it in your life, you've had it in potential inside you all your life. And so you learn it more quickly than if you're trying to learn, say, calculus, and as you learn it, as it becomes, and when I say learn, I mean just practice it. You just practice, it becomes a habit. As it becomes a habit, you become happier because it's natural to you. So you become more ordered as a human person. You become more what you're supposed to be. So if I learn a new language, that's nice. It allows me to do more things. It doesn't make me any happier. In fact, I speak German. How does that? Doesn't make me happy. But if I grow in temperance or self-discipline, I actually become a happier person. So that's the difference between a habit and a super habit or a virtue. Between them, that would be still at the sort of Stoic level. But then at the Christian level, the difference is the idea, as you mentioned already, of grace. Right? That grace then comes into it and supernaturalizes, if you will, the habits, so that then they allow us to live as adopted sons of God, right? Not just as not just as superhuman beings, but as supernatural in a sense at that point. So,
no, that's a really good distinction, because there is this there is, as I said, mentioning about this Navy SEAL podcast that I listen to sometimes, and he's probably one of the more famous, but he's one of many, and it's in an interesting trend. I'm really into weightlifting and things like that, so I try to find some weightlifting shows I can listen to here and there. It's hard. A lot of the guys just have, their ideas are kind of filthy language, so I got to turn it off. But there's some decent ones, but it's interesting listening to these guys talk about their daily routines and what they do in order to, get their gains and whatever. And but they're talking about it from a purely almost self-centered perspective, talking about the amount of sleep that one must get, or when they must eat, and the type of mindset they have to go be in when they go to bed, and all these kinds of things. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you're not going to do any of this that way when you have children. It's not a death sentence, but 7 to 9 hours of uninterrupted sleep a night. It's like, okay, between the time you have your first, good luck, especially if you have a lot of, it's just good luck. And so, but the Christian, the help of sanctifying grace, it is the, I guess to speak kind of colloquially, it's the little extra oomph or the little extra pep in your step that you're going to need when on the natural level, you just can't keep up with the demands that you've set for yourself, because naturally speaking, it is kind of impossible. But with God, all things are possible. So how would you say, with these super habits, like what is the role of the life of prayer and the sacramental life, and how important is that?
So a really nice analogy comes from a medieval theologian by the name of John of St. Thomas.
Yeah.
And he gives this analogy for virtue and grace and the role of grace in virtue. He says it's like, as you grow in a virtue, it's like rowing a boat. So as you row, you get stronger. And the more you do that, the stronger you get, the more effectively, the faster you can row. But then when grace intervenes, it's like hoisting a sail. And the gifts of the Holy Spirit are the sails that allow you to catch the grace. And the boat is still moving in the same direction. It's moving even faster, but with less effort on your part.
Yeah.
So you could try to grow in self-discipline to resist, porn or alcohol or the different things that might get in the way of a thriving, happy life. And you can struggle and you can struggle, but there are easier ways to do it. One is on the natural level, and St. Thomas points this out, St. Thomas Aquinas, it's really brilliant, is that growing in self-discipline is not primarily a function of kind of grit your teeth and bear down and take it like a man, That's not really self-discipline. Self-discipline is the habit of only following your desires when they make sense to do so. And when they don't, learning carefully to redirect them, to coax them in a different direction. Because if we always clamp down on our desires, then what can happen is we just basically run out of energy, run out of steam. Because the emotions motivate. And if our emotions are pushing us in the wrong direction, we have to try to tutor them into the right direction. And that's where grace can really help them, right? So we can ask to be freed of unwholesome desires and then redirect them into more wholesome directions, yeah?
It's interesting you say that, because it's interesting to watch what's in vogue, as I said, in the world of self-help and fitness culture and stuff, because so I'm 36 years old. And so, I grew up in the 90s, and the 90s was the time of the no fat, everyone had to have a full grain diet or whatever. And then the late 90s, early 2000s was the low carb. And then eventually we went to the whole wheat. Everything had to be whole wheat. And then we went to basically the keto and the paleo diet and all these kinds of things. And now, funny enough, what is in vogue is eat like a normal person, but have self-control. So don't just only eat chicken and broccoli. How about you just eat like everyone's always eaten in history, but just don't eat too much? And I was just in Italy. And I used to live in Italy as a child, and my mother's Italian, and you being from Malta, there's similar European traditions as far as food is concerned. And I was just back in Italy for the first time in 18 years with my wife on a pilgrimage. And, my mom always tells me this because she goes home, twice a year, and she'll go home and she eats whatever she wants, but she always comes back and she says, I lost 5 or 10 pounds the month I was there. And why is that? Well, European culture is Christendom, and all of their rituals and all of their habits, from everything to the schedule of the day with the ringing of the bells, the siesta in the afternoon, and all these kinds of things, but also the way that they eat. People don't really snack. They don't really gorge on junk food. They just eat normal food, sitting at the table with family members. They have a variety of it, and the portions are usually relatively small, and there's a variety of portions, so you kind of satiate all of the things that you want. You don't, Italians eat bread and pasta every day. How is it that they're not, have an obesity problem? Because it's part of a meal with some pork and some vegetables and olive oil and whatever. And so really, this is exactly what you're saying from St. Thomas is those desires that are good and that are natural should be satiated, but they should only be satiated kind of in their bounds and not excessively.
And they can learn, they can be trained. So he gives an analogy of desires like as horses, wild horses. And you're the charioteer, and you shouldn't let them run wherever they want to go because they end up flipping the chariot and you'll die, you know. And that's what happens if you give in to your desires. You end up dying, you know, of alcohol poisoning or drug overdose or whatever. But neither should you kill the horses or hamstring them, you know. You want to be able to train them so that you go as fast as they would go when they were wild, but in the direction that you want them to go, you know. And so that's why the idea of habit practicing daily a moderate relationship with food, you know, is such a great example. We lived for 6 months or thereabouts in Rome. I was teaching in our Rome campus some years ago, and I had the same experience as your mother. I came back 10 pounds lighter, even though we had pasta and pizza and wine every day, but just like
often,
you know, often because of the culture of eating. As you say, there's no snacking. You just eat the meals at set time. But there are fasting times as well as feasting times. And then the other benefit actually living in Rome is you walk everywhere.
You walk everywhere,
Also part of the picture, you know. But yeah, it really is this culture of trying to recapture manhood, I think, is very healthy and good at its root, but it goes astray in a number of ways, as I think you're observing, right? And the virtues, the beauty of it is they show us how to stay on track, that you can be as manly as you want to be without going crazy by growing in each of the virtues.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up where the manhood thing can go off track, because, you know, vice is always in many ways is a overzealous application of a virtue, or an imbalanced application of a virtue, you know, and there is that in the modern sort of recapture manhood movement, where there's a lot of arbitrary lines that are drawn, and I look at them and I go, you know what? I think you're actually just trying to get out of having to change a diaper every once in a while, and saying, you know, and I'm like, I don't really think that I think you're pulling a fast one on me here, because I don't like changing them, but it has to happen sometimes, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's a really good example in terms of talking about extremes. So you're right. Almost every virtue has two opposites, right? So a vice is a bad habit if a virtue is a good habit, and it's a bad habit that opposes a virtue in two different directions, usually. So the classic example, I already mentioned courage. Courage is how we deal with our fears. If we give too much concern to our fears, then that's the vice of cowardice, right? But if we give too little regard to our fears, then that's the vice of foolhardiness, stupid, dangerous stuff that you shouldn't be doing, you know? Whereas the courageous person is in between these two extremes. And how do you determine that? You just look to other people who are courageous, who have gone before you or who are around you. That's what mentorship is for, you know. That's how we learn. But the example I really like is the virtue of what is classically called meekness. But I don't like that word because it has come to mean weakness or wimpiness, right? But to truly be meek, and the Bible talks about Moses as being very meek. About Christ says, "Be like me, I'm meek and humble of heart." You know, there's a certain toughness to being meek. It's a habit of being gentle and strong at the same time, right? And in fact, it is the habit for dealing with anger. Mm-hmm. And the two extremes are, on the one hand, the excess is you feel the anger and you explode, and that does tremendous harm to your children and to your marriage and to your friendships, right? But the other extreme is you bottle it up, which eventually leads to an explosion, but you just kind of try to, but true meekness is to feel the anger, but to use the anger to do good. So I actually, in my book, I invented a word. I call it gentle firmness. It's a compound word, right? So it's the steel fist in a velvet glove. You know, I'm very calmly, very gently saying no. And I will say no, and you'll have to kill me to stop me saying anything other than no, you know. But I don't freak out. I just calmly, strongly, firmly, so hence sort of gentle firmness. And that's the right way to use our angry feelings. It's not to try, it's like anger, I'm afraid of it, it's so bad, I mustn't be angry. No, of course you should be angry in the face of injustice, for example, you know.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the velvet glove and the steel hand. When the lockdown was really bad here in Canada, I was very grateful to God for inventing punching bags. And I remember that was a very good way of fueling that for something else, and in the right context. Okay, before we conclude here, how about you give us a couple habits that are part of your daily or your normal life that you find very helpful and important for your virtue?
Sure. And to be fair, everybody's going to be focused on something different, but so I have been trying to grow in the habit I call alertness, which is the habit of having good situational awareness. I'm very good at focusing. My wife would say, like, a baby could be crying, another baby could be trying to murder his brother, and I'm there, I'm reading or doing homework or grading papers, and I just got it all tuned out. And that's a very useful habit, but also useful is scanning the environment, scanning the horizon, and being aware of the changes going on, and knowing when you may need to act, and so on. So I've been practicing that. And it can be simple things like just spending a few minutes just reading up on some favorite news sites, or even a little bit of social media, just to see what's good, like X, to see what's going on, anything I should be aware of. So that's one. And then, I could go on all day, but another one I found to be really useful is gratitude. So I picked up a year ago the habit of writing in a gratitude journal, after reading some studies about the health benefits of that, which is really astonishing. I had a bad case of sciatica while I was writing the book. And I read, and I started using a gratitude diary. I also got, the shots, and the acupuncture and everything, physical therapy, everything I needed to do, But I also started doing this gratitude diary, and I'm convinced that it helped. And I continue to do it today, each day. And the research studies show that people who keep a daily gratitude diary have less chronic pain, less anxiety, less depression. Because just somehow being grateful puts you in a better state of mind, I guess. Yeah.
Well, my favorite author is G.K. Chesterton, and we can end with a bit of his wisdom on that topic exactly. And he said, the worst thing about being an atheist is when you are really thankful for something, you don't have anybody to thank. And
Exactly.
There seems to be some wisdom there. Well, Thank you. This has been wonderful. I'm just going to show your book one more time on the screen here. I recommend this, and I'll also put a link in the description, ladies and gentlemen, for the app. And this is great. I'm really glad you've done this, and you can check it out. Superhabits, the Universal System for a Successful Life. Written by a man with, of course, primarily Catholic faith, but practical knowledge, all of the realities of what it takes to be in a world of successful people, as you can understand by his biography. So thank you very much for coming on to our show. And is there anywhere else that people can access your work that you'd like to share?
Yes. So I have a Substack, superhabit.substack.com, Superhabit singular in that one. And I'm on LinkedIn fairly regularly as well. So they search my name on LinkedIn. Those are the two primary places. And happy to be connected with anybody on LinkedIn to keep up on all this stuff.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much. I'll make sure I link those things in the description area for this podcast. And ladies and gentlemen, check out the links. And if you are going to buy the book, maybe as a good Christmas gift, I would recommend using the link that's underneath, because there is a little agreement between myself and Sophia. I may or may not get a little kickback from each. So you help the author, you help me. Everybody's scratching everybody's back, so that's what we want. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Mere Tradition. And until next time, God bless you all, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.